Hello again and welcome to another Mordy and Glory, the old world video. In today's episode, we shall be doing another after action report. That's right, it's time for some dispatches from the front lines. And oh boy, have I got a spicy meatball for your viewing pleasure. Not only did I go to another old world tournament, not only did I take the Empire of Man with lots of state troops and artillery, but I also went to my first 2,000 point tournament. And actually, it was my first 2,000 point games of Old World in general. Up until this point, I've played 1250. So I was diving right into the deep end. Let me tell you, it was so much fun. Playing Old World at 2K is amazing. And I cannot wait to take you through step by step my experience at this event. And so without further ado, let's not mess around any further. The hype train is fully in motion. Let's summon the elect accounts and charge right into today's episode. As is tradition, I want to start this video with a few thank yous. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you to Just Play Games in Liverpool for hosting the event. Just Play is one of the stores that I go to regularly for my Warhammer 40k RTTs, and this was their first Old World event, and they did a really good job. Round timings were on point, pairings were on point, the TO was on hand to make some judgment calls, and even though it was a 2,000 point tournament, everyone was pretty new to it, and so the TO did a really good job of just managing everyone along, and for a lot of people it was their first Old World tournament, so big well done to them for smashing it and hosting a good event. I also want to say a big thank you to all of my opponents. Every single one of them was a gent. Most of us were pretty new to the game, we were just muddling our way through it, but there were a couple of guys that had a lot of experience, or at least good familiarity with the rules, and they were a great help and they taught me a lot about the game. So big thank you to everyone I played. You guys made the tournament awesome. But with all of that said, let's get into the video proper, and let's start off by having a look at my army list. Now, as per usual, I have done a separate video going into the nitty-gritty, deep diving the army that I took, and I'll make sure there's a link to that down in the description below, so you can check that out and really get an idea of what was in the army. But what I'll do now is just a brief overview of what I took and some overarching thoughts on why I went for this particular army. Starting off, we have the characters, and we have a general of the Empire. He had a halberd, full plate armor, the white cloak, and dragon bow, and he was on foot. Full plate armor and the white cloak gives him a 4+ armor save and a 5+ invulnerable save, and I really liked the halberd. I've been taking a lot of great weapons on my characters, but with them striking last, it can mean that they end up getting killed, or it's kind of risky getting into those challenges. But I found with the halberd, combined with the fact that a lot of your Empire characters are strength 4, you go up to strength 5, cheeky bit of AP in there, and you might get a 6, and you get AP -2. So I have to say, I really did like the halberd on my General of the Empire, and it would definitely be my go-to two-handed weapon going forward. But the main reason I had this guy was the dragon bow. He's got ballistic skill 5, meaning that at long range he will get to shoot the dragon bow hitting on 3s, and it's quite a big shot. So this was just my hand trying out a shooty General of the Empire. Supporting the General, I had a Captain of the Empire, and this was my battle standard bearer. He was equipped very similarly. He had a halberd, full plate armor, and the Talisman of Protection, essentially giving him also a 4+ armor save and a 5+ ward save, and then a halberd for a little bit of cheeky strength 5 attacks. With this being a 2,000 point game, I thought it was appropriate to take a level 4 wizard, so I had a wizard lord level 4 with elementalism, but I didn't have any other equipment. I didn't go for the lore familiar. To be honest, I figured that with elementalism, all of the spells are good apart from the first one, and if I roll the first one, I'll just swap it out for the signature. Most of the time that worked. There were 1 or 2 times when I wish I had Earthen Ramparts in there and I didn't get it, but overall I found with level 4 elementalism I didn't need the lore familiar. Whatever I rolled tended to be quite useful. And the final 2 characters were 2 Empire engineers, no upgrades whatsoever. I was taking them for their ability to help me reroll artillery dice or give my artillery extra ballistic skill, because as you will see, I had a lot of war machines in this list. But we'll get to those in just a moment. First, we have the core. I took 4 units of state troops. Yeah, baby, lots and lots of infantry. You guys know I love it. So I had 2 units of 24 halberdiers with full command, a unit of 30 state troops with thrusting spears, light armor, shields, full command, and then another unit of 28 state troops with spears, shields, light armor, full command. And the halberdiers were deployed in an 8x3 formation, and both spear blocks were deployed in a 6x5 formation. Halberdiers obviously only get to fight in one rank, so having them wider means that even if they take a few casualties, they should be able to strike back. And the spearmen are more there for the static combat res, and with the fighting extra ranks, they can still poke a few eyes out with their pointy sticks. Then we get to the special units, and I had 2 great cannons and a mortar. Yes, I did take a mortar. In my last tournament, I did experience being on the receiving end of indirect fire in the form of rock lobbers and goblin doom divers, so I thought I would try my hand and see what the mortar is like. On paper, it looks frankly terrible, being strength 2, even though it is a large blast, but I thought I would give it a go and find out if it was any good or not. Finally, we get to the rare units, and I, of course, had a steam tank. You pretty much have to take one in an Empire army. Not only does this thing act as another piece of artillery with that steam cannon, but it's also really tough, so you can put it on a flank and just completely lock it down and just not worry about being outflanked by some horrible big enemy unit like cavalry. And then last but certainly not least, I had a Hellblaster volley gun. Ho-ho! I don't want to give too much away, but Hellblaster volley gun is my new favorite artillery piece. Every single game, this thing did really well. Now, the general battle plan with this list was to create a gun line. Old World is about killing enemy units, and so what my plan was to have my state troops hold the line whilst the great cannons, mortars, steam tank, and Hellblaster volley guns just unleash death from afar. And hopefully, with the amount of artillery I've got, I'll be able to soften the enemy up. And when combat is joined, my normally outclassed state troops will be able to grind their way through. A lot of people say that state troops aren't very good, and they aren't amazing, but they're pretty cheap. The fact that I've got 100 plus state troops in this army and it's only cost me 750 points is quite nice. So I feel like between the artillery and the state troops, I've got the firepower and the numbers and the bodies to be able to grind and attrition my way to victory. But that just about wraps up the list. So now let's get into the lay of the land. How competitive was this event? Overall, I would describe this tournament as regular competitive. It was not a total Shark Tank. It wasn't damn competitive. It wasn't a noob stomping, seal clubbing fest beginner tournament. It was more of just a normal competitive experience. About 50% of the players there were new to the old world, had got their armies together, but had played a few games and kind of knew, fundamentally how the game worked. And then the other 50% of the players had either played in other game systems similar to Old World competitively, or had a lot of games under the belt, or had been to an Old World tournament already. So it was a little bit more competitive than the last Old World tournament I went to, which was very much a beginner one. And I think a big part of this was the fact that it was 2,000 points. Fundamentally, when you get up to that 2,000 point level, the players that are going to come to the event are likely going to be those ones which are heavily invested into the game and are really wanting to play it hard and play it well and just have a lot of fun with it. As for the terrain on the event, they were using the smaller 60 by 44 inch board, so not the full 6x4, and that definitely meant it was a little cramped on the table sometimes. There were still opportunities for flanking and stuff, but with my army having a lot of infantry and being able to deploy quite wide, I found that very rarely did I feel at risk of being outmaneuvered or flanked, and I had no cavalry worth a damn in my army. I suppose you could count the steam tank a bit like cavalry, but not really, as it does move quite slowly and quite randomly. The terrain on these smaller maps was also pre-placed, so it wasn't player placement taking turns. It was TO came around, set the terrain up each round and said, that's what you guys are using, keep it like that. I have to say, really, really liked that. One of the big things I don't like in Warhammer 40k and in the old world is the fact that the terrain is player placed. I think it can be a big disadvantage for someone that is learning the game versus someone who's played the game before, and also just adds another mechanic, another area, which is something you have to keep track of. One of the things I think old world's really good at is being a complicated game that just plays surprisingly smoothly. So having the tournament placed terrain and not the player placed terrain was a really, really big plus. But with all of that said, now let's get into the real reason why you're all here. The main meat of the video. Let's get into the games, and we'll start off with round one. So the first battle, I got paired into John and his Empire of Man. My God, sir, it was going to be an Empire versus Empire battle. Now, that was actually really, really cool, because in the lore right now, in the old world, there is a civil war going on. There are actually 3 emperors fighting it out for the Empire of Man. So unlike in sometimes like 40k when you have like blue on blue incidents and it feels like, oh, this is just a training exercise, no such thing with the Empire of Man. And his army was completely different to mine. John had all of the knights. He was a pure cavalry Empire army. His list consisted of an Empire Engineer, a General of the Empire on Imperial Griffin with full plate armor, Ogre Blade, and the White Cloak. He also had a level 4 Wizard Lord who had the Mace of Hellstorm and the Lore Familiar, and he went for Illusion Magic. Now, side note here, this tournament took place just before the recent Old World FAQ. So the Mace of Hellstorm Spectral Doppelganger combo does work. For his core, he had a unit of 6 Empire Knights with command and lances and shields. Then he had 8 Empire Knights with command and great weapons. And then he had 11 Empire Knights which were drilled and had lances and shields and full command as well. In the special section, we had a unit of Demigryph Knights, 3 strong with the Preceptor and Standard Bearer, but no Musician. And then there were 2 Great Cannons. And finally, in the rare section, we had a Steam Tank. The mission for round 1 was pitched battle. Good old-fashioned pitched battle. Let's just charge and fight each other. For deployment, I ended up going for a unit of halberdiers on the right with a unit of spearmen next to them in the middle. And then moving along, I had a unit of spearmen with my general and BSB that were in the middle left, and then another unit of halberdiers that were over on the left flank. I interspersed my cannons in between these units, making sure that there would be enough room for the cannons to fire through, but also that would be enough room for my state troops to maneuver around a little bit, so there was no risk of them falling back in good order through the cannons and artillery after I'd had a turn or 2 of movement. And then I had my steam tank, which is over on the left flank supporting the halberdiers there, and that was about it. For my opponent, his deployment, he had a unit of knights with lances on the right flank. This is from the Empire perspective. And then, I should say, from my Empire perspective. And then next to them, he had his general on his griffin. In the middle, he had the steam tank and the great weapon knights. And then he also had, going towards the left, the demigryphs and the cannons. And then on the far left-hand side, he had his big unit of drilled knights with the wizard in there with the Mace of Hellstorm, and this was going to come flying down the left flank and try and smash through into me, hence why I put my steam tank over there. I thought that the steam tank would actually have a reasonable chance of surviving a charge from that big brick, but a little bit of foreshadowing, that mace combo is very, very powerful. After all the units were down, there was only one thing left to do. That was find out who went first. We rolled off and the Empire went first. And by the Empire, I mean my Empire went first. Yes, despite the fact my opponent was all cavalry, somehow the infantry did manage to seize the initiative and we did get the first turn. My turn 1 was pretty straightforward. I marched forward a lot of my forces to create a bit of a buffer zone, and I marched them forward so I was outside of my opponent's maximum charge range, but if he decided to go for his maximum march, I would be able to get a good counter charge off. And he's knights, he wants to be charging, not me. So that puts my opponent in a bit of a tricky position. Does he use his full movement or does he pull back a little bit? That potentially means it might take him a bit longer to get into combat. And then we open fire. First shot of the game, I roll my mortar. It rolls a misfire. I use my engineer's ability. It rolls in the misfire. I roll the die to see what happens on the black powder misfire table, and I roll a 1. First time ever using a mortar. First shot of the entire game blows itself up. Oh man, and this was a really good game for it because a lot of those knights are high armor save but only toughness 3, so it would have been able to get lots of wounds on them. Even though it's wounding on 5s and 6s, it's a good chance for it to get lots of wounds on those knights, but it couldn't do that because it blew up and died. Moving swiftly on, we got to the rest of the shooting. My steam tank was able to kill 2 knights from the unit on the left. My Hellblaster volley gun was able to do 2 wounds to one of the demigriffs. It rolled quite well, but my opponent rolled well on his armor saves. And then the other cannon, the one in the middle, did not hit. It just bounced straight over the demigriff. It's got a really big bounce, and I slightly misjudged the where to put the thing. Actually, I think it rolled a 2 for the landing and then misfired and stuck in the ground. That was it. So I placed it tension in the back, but it's stuck in the ground. The cannon that's on the right hand side was able to kill 2 of the knights with great weapons, and that was about it. So at the end of my turn 1, I have killed 4 knights, injured a demigriff, and blown up my own mortar. Good stuff. My opponent's turn 1, really straightforward. Everything just comes forward. Knights on the right just go straight forward, going down towards sort of the middle point of the map. The general flaps his wings and comes over the forest. Steam tank and great weapon knights move forward. They'll be able to get a turn 2 charge off, which is fine, but they don't come so far forward that it makes it easy for me to get a counter charge on my turn 2. And then the demigriffs come forward. Again, they're looking for a turn 2 charge on the spearmen. And then the cannons, which were hidden behind the hill, now move onto the hill, but he can't shoot them this turn. And then we have the knights on the left. Now, what my opponent does is he casts a column of crystal, which means that in such a position where my steam tank won't be able to charge into them, and then he moves his own knights up behind that column of crystal because he wants to essentially stop me from charging him. And the beginning of his turn, he's just going to go in the strategy phase, get rid of that column of crystal now, and then he's going to charge in, which is a really, really good way of using that spell defensively. Moving into battle round 2, and we start off with my empire, my mercenary company, and my turn is again pretty straightforward. With these constrained boards, you're kind of just marching and moving towards each other and just getting into some straight up brawls. Now, my infantry basically stays still this time. I'm just getting ready to absorb the charge. The only real movement that I do is my steam tank moves up to the column of crystal, and I'm like, look, I'm just going to essentially accept the fact that you're going to get the charge on me, but hopefully my steam tank will survive that charge, and then my halberdiers will be able to counter charge into your knights, and that will be quite nice. In terms of firepower, my steam cannon puts its cannonball into the demigriff knights, but rolls a 1 to wound. Well, it happens. My Hellblaster volley gun goes after the demigriff knights and is able to kill one of them and injure another. For the rest of my firepower, I've just got the 2 great cannons. Now, both of these great cannons don't really get any results this turn. One of them just massively overshoots the target. It just does a really, really big overshoot and then just goes straight past the great weapon knights. And the other one, I think it launched the cannonball into the Empire Hero. Oh, that was it, yes. I launched the first cannonball, went into the Empire Hero and rolled a 1 to wound again. So I rolled 2 1 to wounds on a cannonball this turn. And the second one went into the Empire Hero on the Big Griffin. And he rolled a 5 up for his ward save, and he was able to tank it. Turn 2 for the knightly orders, and it is crunch time. The unit of knights with the wizard go into the steam tank, the demigriff knights go into my spearmen, and the unit of great weapon knights go into the spearmen that are facing them, the second unit. The Empire General, unfortunately, isn't able to make a charge, nor are the knights on the right, and that is because my halberdiers had moved forward, and then they'd moved back again to make it just a really difficult charge for those units. He couldn't physically charge with the knights. He tried to charge with the general, but he just couldn't get it off. It just didn't go far enough. It was basically at sort of his maximum charge distance, and so he did just stumble forward a little bit there. As for combat, over on the left with the steam tank, I got introduced to the meaning of pain. Specifically, I got introduced to the Hellstorm Mace and Spectral Doppelganger combo. Now, to be clear, this combo does not work anymore as per the latest Old World FAQ, but this tournament took place about 4 or 5 days before that document came out. So this is how it worked back then. The Mace of Hellstorm only allows you to roll 1 attack, but it's 1 mega wallop. It's like strength 10, AP -5, D6 damage. But if you use the illusion spell Spectral Doppelganger, that allows you to do 2d6 with a magical weapon of your choice. And that's just 2d6 hits. It's not the mage which is hitting you with the weapon, it's the spell which is essentially generating hits using that weapon's profile. And so my opponent gets his spell off. Unfortunately, I do not dispel it. And he proceeds to get 5 wounds through on my steam tank. And just obliterates. It's AP -5 D6 damage. I think my steam tank takes like 20 wounds overall. He just completely obliterates steam tank and then overruns into the halberdiers behind. All I can say is I am both very happy and very sad that that combo no longer exists. I'm happy because means my steam tank might be a bit more survivable if I get into the Empire versus Empire matchup. I'm also very sad because it means now I can't do it. But they have clarified that basically if you have a weapon that does 1 attack, it only ever does 1 attack. So you could probably Spectral Doppelganger with it, but it doesn't matter how much you roll on the 2d6 hits, you get 1 extra hit with it. Fortunately, the halberdiers that my opponent overran into did have earthen ramparts on them. So I had done that as an insurance policy in case the steam tank hadn't held, and that's really important because then it counted as a disordered charge, so my opponent wouldn't get his initiative bonus. In the middle, we have the Demigryph Knights versus the Spearmen. They do some damage to me, but bear in mind they've lost one of their number now, so it's not so bad the damage output that they're doing, and they win the combat, but only because I don't get my rank bonus because of their first charge. And so I just fall back a little bit. I think I give ground and just go back a little bit. And I don't do any damage back to them. But then over on the sort of middle right, we have the Knights with the Great Weapons versus my Spearmen. And we get to fight at the same time because Great Weapons are slow and Spears get +1 initiative when they're charged. And these guys have only got a 4-up save. They've got heavy armor and barding on the horses. But because they've got Great Weapons, they don't have shields. And so I actually end up killing these Knights down to, I think it's like 2 or 3 of them left. It's not many. There's not many left whatsoever. And the only reason they are able to win that fight is because I don't have my rank bonus. So overall, I end up just giving ground a little bit there as well. But I'm kind of happy with where I'm at the end of round 2. I've absorbed the charges, and that Maze of Hellstorm has done its trick. It is really, really scary if it does get it off again. But I feel like I should be able to hold and grind out these combats for a little bit now. The big problem I've got going into my turn 3 is going to be the second wave, which hits my right flank, which is going to be another unit of Knights and that general on a big old Griffin. In my turn 3, there's basically no movement. It's just shooting and combat. Now for shooting, I start getting into some counter battery fire with my opponent's great cannons. He'd actually shot both of his cannons at me in that turn 2, and he had actually, one had overshot and one cannonball had actually hit one of my great cannons. My opponent rolled unlucky and he only rolled like a 1 on the number of damage that he did, so my great cannon did end up living. I then turn around with my artillery. I'm like, right, I need to start blasting. I can't let these cannons just start picking all of my artillery off because that's the main thing I've got going for me. But I think, you know what? I've got to deal with that general on a Griffin first. I've got to. If I can deal with him first, then whatever artillery I've got left can start going into his cannons. And I think there's one thing for the job here. The Hellblaster volley gun. Now my opponent's a large target, so I can just see him. And War Machines get a free pivot; it doesn't count as moving. So I just turn my Hellblaster volley gun and I fire into the general on the big Griffin. Now it's long range, but I roll the number of shots that I get for the artillery piece, and I get a 10, an 8, and a 6, giving me 24 shots and no misfires, which means I can then use my Empire Engineer's ballistic skill to mean that I'm hitting on 4s. Now, statistically, I should get 12 hits with these shots, and then he's toughness 5 is my strength 5, so I should get about 6 wounds. And then my opponent has he's got full plate armor and a shield, so he should be he should save most of these. He should maybe take 1 or 2 wounds from this. I roll my hits and I get 17 hits. It's obscene. The Hellblaster just goes, just fires everything. I then roll to a wound and I get 12 wounds, 5 of which are 6s for Armor Bane. My opponent's on like a 5 up, like a 6 up, 5 up. Needless to say, the Empire General just goes down, just gets completely turned to Swiss cheese. My opponent doesn't roll that well on his armor saves, and I overkill the, obviously overkill doesn't mean anything in shooting, but I overkill the Empire General on the Griffin by about 2 wounds. So convincingly, it just goes down, and that is a huge relief. That moment right there might be the turning point of the game, because now my right flank is somewhat secure. I've got a steam tank which is in the middle, but that's not going to get into combat with me straight away. And then I've got a unit of Knights Lances, Knights with Lances, which might slam into my halberdiers, but there's only like 6 of them. There's no characters there. I can probably weather that and grind that out. So that general going down was huge, because he would have just flown over and started picking up my artillery pieces one at a time. Elsewhere, because my Hellblaster just one volley ramboed the general on the Griffin, my cannons could start doing some counter battery fire. And the first cannon fires into the his great cannon on the hill. I land it perfectly, and I get the damage, and I get the wound, I get the damage, and I just pick that great cannon up. And then the second great cannon that I had, I think that one shot into his great cannon as well, but then I rolled a 1 to wound. So I do pick up one of his great cannons, and I start getting dominance on the artillery field. Moving on to combats. Over on the left, because my opponent had overrun into the halberdiers, he did count as charging, but he hadn't been able to, because he was in combat, he hadn't been able to dispel my earthen ramparts that I put back on the halberdiers. This meant that because he charged a unit that was defending a low linear obstacle, and they were still defending a low linear obstacle, that he doesn't get his initiative bonus. And then I'd also put Stormcaller on those knights. They were actually at -1 initiative, so that meant that my halberdiers got to strike first. And I issued a challenge with my halberdier guy, and my opponent accepted with his knight receptor. And my guy won the challenge because he struck first. And he got a hit in, he got 2 hits in, he got 1 wound in. It was an armor bane wound, and it just chopped the enemy sergeant out of the saddle. And then the rest of my halberdiers went in and were also able to do another wound here and there. I think they killed another knight overall. My opponent strikes back, and he does do some damage, but not a huge amount. I think he might end up winning combat just, but it's not enough for me to worry about, and I just give ground slightly, but it's not a really big deal. And then we get over to the Demigriffs. Now, this time, he's not striking first, and this time I have my rank bonus. So we strike at the same time, and I have a lot of spear attacks here. And what's interesting is my opponent has equipped his Demigriff guys with halberds, because he wanted them to be good in ongoing combats. But halberds required 2 hands, so he couldn't use his shields in combat. And as a result, he's only on a 3-up save, and so I am able to injure and kill the second Demigriff knight. And so there's just 1 knight left. Both knights get to attack, but they don't roll that well. So my opponent actually, it's like a drawn combat or something crazy at the end, but then I have a musician and he doesn't, so he loses the combat. He full blown flees, and he only goes like 5 inches, even with Swift Stride, and I chase him and I cut him down and I get the Demigriff knights. Anyone out there will tell you there's no way demigryphs are meant to be worse than state troops, but it kind of goes to show that it's not all about the theory hammer. State troops are very sticky, and if they can survive the first charge, they're quite good at grinding it out against anything that doesn't have a 2-up save, and these demigryphs, they didn't have a 2-up save. Over onto the middle right flank, and my spearmen fight before the Great Weapon Knights and just chop the remaining ones out of the saddle. And that really is the end of turn 3, and to be honest, that's kind of sealed the deal with the game. My opponent has lost a lot of knights, a lot of big hitters, and in his turn 3, essentially, he charges the remaining knights on the right-hand flank into the halberdiers there, and kills a couple, loses a couple, and we end up just grinding that combat out there until I think turn 4 I end up winning the combat against them and just chopping them, just breaking them, making them flee away. And over on the on the artillery duel, one of his great cannons takes out one of my great cannons, but then the next turn I take out his great cannon, and then the only really thing that of note that was left was his knights on the left hand flank, the ones with the spectral doppelganger. And what was funny is because I chopped down his sergeant, and because in his turn he was still under the effects of Stormcall, what it meant is I was striking first again, so I issued a challenge and he refused it with his mage. I think he sort of panic refused it because I think the mage got like 3 wounds, so I couldn't physically like kill the mage, but there was obviously a chance that I could do some damage, and he may not have got Spectral Doppelganger off. So he refused the challenge of the mage, which meant that his unit didn't do a huge amount of damage. And over the course of a couple of turns of combat, I actually grind those guys down, and I do end up breaking them and forcing them back. They just move back. I don't catch them. I do end up breaking them and forcing them away. And so by the end of the game, I know we've skipped ahead a few turns there, but really it was just some grinding combats back and forth. At the end of the game, my opponent has like a steam tank left. He's got a couple of broken units of knights left, and my army is relatively intact. I've got the mortar that blew up, I've got the cannon that got killed, and I've got a few state units which have been severely mauled. But by and large, and the steam tanks will be dead as well, but by and large, the Empire Infantry Corps was intact. And so it ended up being a major victory to my Empire army. Rossenberg's Vagabonds, my mercenary company, earned their pay that game. With game number 1 under the belt and a victory in the bag, it was time to go straight into game number 2. No rest for the wicked, and this time I was facing Kevin and his dwarves. Now I'm really interested in dwarves. In fact, I'm building up an army for the old one myself, so I was very excited about this game because it was going to be a great learning experience no matter what happened. Now his list contained an Anvil of Doom with the Master Rune of Calm. He also had a Rune of Warding. There was a Thane with hand weapon, great weapon, full plate armor, and he was a battle standard bearer, and he had the Rune of Battle and the Rune of Fear. And then there was a Master Rune of Gromril and 2 times Rune Shielding. We then had a Rune Smith, and he just had hand weapon, heavy armor, shield, and a Rune of Spell Breaking. For core units, there were 10 Quarrelers with full command. There were 8 Rangers with crossbows, heavy armor, and shields. And there were 30 Dwarf Warriors, all with heavy armor, great weapons, veteran, standard bearer, and musician. We also had in the special units, there were 18 Iron Breakers, and this is where his standard bearer and also his runesmith were residing. And these are Iron Breakers, they have full command, and their standard bearer had a Rune of Battle. So there are actually 2 runes of battle in this army, which is kind of cool as dwarves that you can do that, because obviously they're not, you can take the same rune more than once as long as it's not a master rune, but you can't take the same combination. So what he's done is he's taken a basic Rune of Battle on his Iron Breakers, and then basically a Rune of Battle and like a tax rune on his BSB. There were 13 Hammerers. These all had heavy armor and shields, and there was a Royal Champion in there and a standard bearer with the Rune of Confusion and a musician. Then there was a cannon and a gyrocopter with the clatter gun. And finally, in the rare slot, we had an organ gun. The mission for round 2 was Mountain Pass, and upon sighting this mission and seeing what army I was up against, I thought this was going to be a slam dunk for the Empire, because dwarves move really slowly, and I clearly have the firepower advantage. There's no doubt about that. I've got 4 artillery pieces and a steam tank to his 1 organ gun, 1 gyrocopter, and 1 cannon. But let me tell you something. Dwarves may be slow, but they are tough little buggers, something I came to truly appreciate in this game. Now for deployment, I have my steam tank on my right flank, and then I had a unit of halberdiers in the middle, 2 units of spearmen, and on the left I had a unit of halberdiers. My artillery was interspersed between these various units in my standard deployment at this point. The dwarves had their, again this is from the Empire perspective, had their hammerers and organ gun on the right flank, ironbreakers in the middle, dwarf warriors in the middle, quarrelers on the left, cannon on the left, and the gyrocopter in the middle as well. And they actually scouted, something I completely forgot about, scouted the rangers behind my lines. I left a big enough gap for them to go into, and they went into it. So they were behind my lines and able to threaten my artillery from the get-go, which is not ideal to say the least. We roll off to see who's going to get the first turn, and I managed to get the first turn, which is a really big deal because it gives me a chance to try and deal with those rangers, and also I've got the shooty advantage, so if I can get the first volleys in, that's great. Starting off with my turn, my movement consists of nothing. I stay still, I hold the line, I don't need to go to the dwarves. All I need to do is basically sit back and shoot them. Pretty gunliney, I know, but I have a feeling that those dwarf warriors are going to outfight me if I go towards them. Now for my shooting, not everything's arranged, but what I end up doing is turning one of my cannons around with its free pivot, and I grape shot into the dwarf rangers, and I'm actually able to kill I don't get a huge amount of shots. I only get like 6 on the grape shot, and I'm actually able to kill like 3 of them, and then I also wind blast them, and I kill another 2 of them. So I do take out 5 of the 8, and I think that's pretty reasonable. These guys aren't that good in combat. That's pretty reasonable. Unfortunately, they do not break and flee because dwarves have a very, very high leadership. Elsewhere, my mortar goes to fire, and it has an engineer nearby, and it rolls a misfire, and then it rolls another misfire with the engineer reroll, and this time it just can't shoot. So this is twice turn 1 where my mortar has double misfired with engineer help. I'm starting to think that the reason why no one likes these things is not because they're any good or any bad, it's because they just blow up or just fail to do anything. Just insane. I also have my steam tank fires its steam cannon, and unfortunately it rolls a 1 to wound against the organ gun in front of it. And then I also have my volley gun, which is able to blast into the gyrocopter scouted forward, but I only do like 2 wounds to it, so it's got like 2 wounds left. It's a tough old thing, and it's got skirmisher. So it's -1 to hit, and I did roll like a misfire as well, and had to use like an engineer to re-roll it. So I wasn't hitting that well. So I was like -2 to hit it. So it was unfortunate, but I was able to take a couple of wounds of it, and so it's kind of injured. Dwarf turn 1, pretty straightforward. They've got to get a wiggle on. They march their entire line forward. They unleash some crossbow bolts from the quarrelers into the halberdiers on the hill and kill like 1 of them. And then the rangers have charged into the mortar, and no one does any damage to each other. It's hilarious. 3 attacks from him, no wounds. 3 attacks from me, no wounds. This is just like a slap fight. And funnily enough, this goes on for ages. like round after round of combat, these 2 guys, these 2 units are just fighting over this mortar. And no one can kill each other. Oh, it's a nightmare. And then his organ gun fires loads of shots into my steam tank and does no damage. They just bounce off. It's looking for 6s to wound. 6s are armor bane, but it's looking for 6s to wound. It's just struggling to get them. And then we have his cannon, which fires into my cannon. And unfortunately, the one that had grape shot is rangers, and unfortunately for him, it rolls a 1 to wound. So turn 1, not a huge amount going on. We roll over his gyrocopter comes forward and does a little bit of shooting, but that's about it. No real damage from it. We then go over to Empire turn 2. The mortar slap fight continues. No one kills each other. I think maybe I lose one guy, but I pass my leadership check. And then elsewhere, my steam tank moves forward a little bit, but not just, it stays just out of charge range of the hammerers, and it puts its steam cannon into the organ gun, and does get a hit and does manage to do 2 wounds, which is great. But unfortunately, because it's not a great cannon, it doesn't get the +1 for the number of damage, and so it just does 2 wounds, and so the organ gun is still alive. My Hellblaster volley gun, my guy with the dragon bow actually shoots into the gyrocopter, and we think that it hits and then wounds, but then we remember that it's got skirmisher, so I didn't actually hit. So then I use the volley gun into it, and I am able to finish it off and kill it. And that was really it for my turn. A bit of firepower back and forth. I'm putting cannonballs into like some dwarf warriors. I'm fit to do a bit of damage there. But really, my shooting is not that good. Despite how much shooting I have, my Hellblaster volley gun has only managed to kill the gyrocopter. My steam cannon has only done 2 wounds to the organ gun. And my great cannon has killed like a couple of dwarf warriors. And I fire the other great cannon into the hammerers and kill like 1 of them. So I'm killing like 1 or 2 dwarves at a time, and my opponent's like shooting back at me and killing like 1 or 2 Empire troops at a time. Speaking of the dwarves, their turn 2. They continue to march forward as best as they can. They're closing the distance. Their cannon actually fires into my cannon and misfires, so it's not going to be shooting for turn 2 or turn 3. That's not going to be shooting until back onto turn 4. And then the Rangers and the mortar crew continue just to tickle, slap fight each other, and he marches up his hammerers as far as they can go. But that's about it. Like I said, there's a bit of crossbow fire from the quarters again. I think another halberdier goes down, but it's very both sides. Oh, and his organ gun fires everything into my steam tank and does like 1 wound to it. So both sides are unleashing insane amounts of ordnance here. He's got crossbows, cannons. He's got organ gun. He's got an organ gun. He's had like a gyrocopter, but obviously which basically did nothing. And then I'm firing back at him with cannons, and I'm firing back at him with Hellblaster volley guns, and just no one's doing any damage. We're just expending so much ordnance, and yet nothing's really dying. We're just tickling each other. Turn 3 for the Empire, I send my steam tank into his hammerers, and I just roll really badly. I roll a 1 for the number of impact hits. I roll a 1 for the number of stomps. I kill like 2 hammerers at best, but he's used like the Anvil of Doom to make them like really, really durable. My steam tank actually doesn't lose in combat, but just gives ground because it's unbreakable and it's fine. And then, yeah, my shooting, I unleashed the Hellblaster volley gun this time into the dwarf warriors, but because they're getting like heavy cover, I'm struggling to get the hits. But I do, I kill like a few more of the dwarf warriors. My great cannon this time goes to fire at his cannon, which is misfired, and mine misfires this time. So that left flank is just misfiring cannons, and once again, the combat with the mortar just ends up being no one kills each other. Again, I think out of 4 rounds of combat, I've lost 1 crewman. He's not lost a single ranger at this point. It's just no one's. I'm using the big fluffy stick on the mortar just to try and like tickle him, but he's not laughing. Goes over to turn 3 for the dwarves, and they get really close this time. So after 3 turns of marching, they have successfully managed to move 18 inches up the board. And they're starting to get there now. So I know that he's gonna get a turn 5 charge. I can't fall back too far, because otherwise I'd potentially give ground off the board. So I know he's gonna get me turn 4. But I don't particularly want to charge him because his units haven't been whittled down enough. The hammerers are still like there's still like a dozen hammerers in that unit. And if a steam tank couldn't crush them, I doubt a unit of halberdiers are gonna do it. Because he gets like loads of initiative and attack bonuses for when I charge him with hammerers, because they're like a really defensive unit. And the Ironbreakers have basically been untouched. Maybe like 1 or 2 has died here and there. And the Dwarf Warriors, like there's like 30 of them, and there's still so many of them that I don't want to go near them. They've all got great weapons. Yes, it's just not. I've just not done the damage. Over 3 rounds of shooting, I've just not really done the damage that I wanted to, unfortunately. Now my round. So for my round 4, what I do is I move my steam tank forward. and it can't quite charge into the organ, but I'm thinking, look, I can't get the charge into the hammers. They've actually they went past me with their turn. So in their turn 3. So I'm going to go after that organ gun. Hey, at least it's some points in the bank. Then I have a gyrocopter and an organ gun, and that'll be nice. And then my Hellblaster volley gun unleashes its fire into the Iron Breakers to just sort of switch things up a little bit, and they just pass their saves. Like, they're on like a 3-up save. I'm struggling to hit them. And I don't get many armor banes, and I end up getting a misfire, which I re-roll into a misfire. So it's just, I'm just not hitting very much at all, unfortunately. But at the end of was that turn 4? Sorry, turn 4. At the end, in my opponent's turn 3, he did actually kill the mortar crew, and then in my turn 4, I turned around and blasted him with the Hellblaster volley gun. That was it. There was 4 rounds of combat. Round 1, round 2, first turn, 2 rounds of 1 round of combat. My turn, 2 rounds of combat. My turn, 3 round of combat. Then turn 4, his turn 3, he did manage to cut through the mortar. Yeah. So my Hellblaster volley gun turns around and just blasts them off and gets rid of them, which is fine. And so it goes over to my opponent's turn 4, and he just marches into my face. Just marches into my face, and it's just like, look, I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you next turn, and I'm just gonna march to your face. So what's kind of funny here is his hammerers march right up to my halberdiers. His ironbreakers march right up to my spearmen with my general in them, and his dwarf warriors they sort of redress the ranks and sort of just add more people onto the ranks. It's like, look, I'm gonna basically sit in front of you, so I've got loads of dudes. If you charge me with your spears and halberds, you'll kill like a handful of dwarves. But he had redressed his ranks a couple of times at this point, and so he had he had 2 ranks of basically like 10 or 12 dwarves or something insane. If I go in there and kill with halberdiers, I might kill like 2 or 3 dwarves. Hitting on 4s, wounding on 4s, AP -1. I might kill like 2 dwarves with my halberdiers with 8 attacks. Spearmen will be lucky if they kill another dwarf, and he's going to hit me back with 9 attacks and just twat me. So what actually happens over on that left flank is we get into a Mexican standoff where I don't want to charge him, so I just spend basically my turn 5, my turn 6, just hell blastering the dwarves, trying to kill them, but just continually, and sort of chipping them down, but no one wants to blink first over there, because if he charges me, then then with my spears and everything, there's a good chance, and because he's got great weapons, and because we're basically just an inch away from each other, just staring each other down, he wouldn't get a big initiative bonus. He'd only be on like initiative 2, so he wouldn't get a big initiative bonus. But if I don't want to charge him, because I don't think I'm going to do enough damage, because my spears are only going to get like a handful of attacks. So we just stand there, and essentially no one fights each other. That left flank just basically, both sides march up to each other, no one fights each other. He crossbows me a bit, I volley gun him a bit, no one goes for the charge because it's too risky. If I charge him and I fail, I lose, because he's just going to start, he might break one of my units. And if he charges me, it's the same way around. And that unit, both sides, there's like several hundred points there, so no one wants to do that combat because no one wants to lose the game. Over on the middle, in his turn 5, he basically charges into my Empire Generals unit with the Ironbreakers, and we just start grinding it out. And he does the same with his hammerers into my halberdiers. Now he does manage to pick up a couple of units like here and there, like overruns and stuff like that. But what's really funny, is in both of those, it gets to the end of turn 6, right? These combats have been grinding out. I know, again, I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, but just imagine that there's just 2 or 3 rounds of combat where he's doing a bit of damage to me, I'm falling back, I'm doing a bit of damage to him, he's sort of absorbing it, okay? And basically, he, between fall back in good order and give ground, he grinds both of these units back, so they're within like 3 or 4 inches of the back battlefield edge, okay? And in his turn 6, we fight again, and he wins both combats. And all he needs to do to win the game is for one of these 2 units, either the halberdiers or my spearmen with the general in it, to fall back in good order. If I fall back in good order, I'll basically fall back off the board unless I roll like a double 1. If I give ground, I'll be an inch away from the back. I roll for the general's unit, I roll a 1 and a 2. Completely stick it. Don't fall. Just give ground. Halberdiers, leadership 9, rerollable. They've lost the combat in kind of a big way versus these hammerers. I roll a 1 and a 1. Snake eyes. Give ground, and they end up with just half an inch to an inch, but they don't quite fall off the board. Yes! And so the spearmen and the halberdiers held the line, saving a huge amount of points for being driven from the field. And what essentially happens is, what's funny is he actually, my steam tank, over the course of sort of turn 5 to 6, breaks his organ gun and kills it. And so when we get to the end of the game, the casualties are really light on both sides. He has lost a gyrocopter, an organ gun, and his rangers. And I have lost a mortar and a great cannon and like an engineer and maybe like another artillery piece. Something, not much. So he's basically, I think it was just, we both killed. He killed 345 points and I killed 336 points. There was a 9-point difference in it. So it was a stone cold draw. 6 rounds of blasting and combat, and all that died was a couple of war machines on both sides. Absolutely mad game. And I just want to say huge props to my opponent. Very, very well done. Big pat on the back, because that's a really difficult situation for the dwarves to be in. Being outshot and having to take the fight to the enemy. And then when he actually got there, he drove me back. He won all those combats. So I would definitely say that my dwarf opponent had the more high ground there. He did things that most dwarf players don't want to do, which is go on the offensive. But he did it, and he didn't panic, and he just did it, and he smashed it. Lessons learned from this game was dwarves are tough. Do not underestimate them. They might look like just regular infantry, but they are so drawable, they will march across the board and twat you in the face if they can. And if you get into combat with them as Empire, you're going to need something heavier than a halberd to crack open their thick dwarven armor. So game number 3 rolls around, and it is going to be against the Beastmen Brayherds. Up until this point, I've actually been facing off against the Forces of Fantasy, but now we shall have to hold the line against the Ravening Hordes. Now, my opponent was Kai, and his list consisted of a Beast Lord, which had an additional hand weapon, heavy armor, and the Bedazzling Helm, Potion Strength, and Slug Skin. Slug Skin is an amazing upgrade, by the way. It gives the character and the unit he's leading -1 to hit, which is just wild. Very slimy. Then he had a Great Beret Shaman, level 4, with the Ruby Ring of Ruin, Hagtree Fetish, and he was using Dark Magic. A Wargore, who was the BSB, who had the Pelt of the Dark Young and the Pelt of Midnight, and he also had a War Banner. Then then going on to the core, we had a 6-strong Goreherd, another 6-strong Goreherd, 10 Ungors with short bows, 6 Chaos Warhounds, a big block of 21 Bestigors, which have got great weapons, heavy armor, stubborn, Gouthorn, standard bearer, and musician. Now, there was a mistake. There were 2 mistakes in Kaiser's that we didn't really catch, unfortunately. The first one was the fact that his Bestigors also had a war banner. So there were 2 war banners in his army, which you can't actually do. Fortunately, I don't think it made a big difference to the game whatsoever. And I think it's one of those things which is, after playing Kai, I can confidently say that there was no tomfoolery going on there whatsoever. It was simply a case of the builder lets you do it, so I imagine that's how it's happened. Now, he also had a Razor Gore herd, so he had a big pig, and then he had a big squad of 25 Ungors, and then for the special, we had a Razor Gore chariot, 1 Dragon Ogre, which again, it had the Charmed Shield, but it can't actually take a Charmed Shield, a Dragon Ogre. And then there were 2 Minotaurs, and finally in the rare section there was a Gorgon. The mission we were playing was Flank Attack, which is kind of an interesting mission. It's a pitched battle, except for your deployment zone is very restricted, but you can put up to 33% of your army into a flank attack. Now, that doesn't start off the board or anything, it just means it can physically be deployed either on the left or the right flank, but not both. So essentially, you're always going to have a refused flank of some kind. Now, I opted to do my flank attack on the left, and Kai opted to do his flank attack on the Empire right. So we actually both kind of had our refused flanks against each other. Now, on my right, as far as I could go, I had the steam tank anchoring things down, and I also had a cannon over there as well. In the middle, I had some halberdiers, spearmen, you guys know the drill, and then over on the left flank, in my flanking force, I had like the mortar, and I also had another unit of halberdiers. My artillery, once again, being spread out between my units, but doing its best to not get in the way of any fallback and good orders, taking into account that I would have a turn or so of moving to avoid any awkward situations where my state troops would fall back through my artillery piece and off the board. For the Beastman deployment, they had their big pig thing. It's like a razor gore on the right hand side, and then there was the Gorgon with the hounds in front of it in the middle. Then the big unit of Bestigors went in the middle. The Shaman was a lone character that was hanging around between the units, and then we had the Ungors, which were near the Gorgon as well, and the regular Gors, which were next to the Bestigors towards the left-hand flank, and the chariot was also as far left as it could go. We roll off to get first turn, and I get the first turn. That's right, I went first in every single game this tournament. It was pretty wild, not gonna lie. Normally I never go first, but I've actually gone first every single game this time, which, let me tell you, it's not something I normally plan for. As you can probably guess from the first two games, my turn one was fairly predictable. I started moving units forward so that I could, establish that buffer zone, and then I started just blasting with my artillery. Now, I put a cannonball and a steam cannon into the Gorgon, and I was able to do a lot of damage to it. I didn't quite kill it turn one, but I brought it down to like 1 or 2 wounds. There wasn't much left of it, and it was not in a good way, the Gorgon. The cannons are still very good at dealing with big things. They might not one-shot them like they did back in Warhammer 8th edition, but they will get them in a couple of volleys. My Hellblaster volley gun ended up not being in range turn one, which is fine. You can't always get it into range. And then I put my other great cannon into the chariot that was on the left flank, and was able to bring that down to just 2 wounds. And then the mortar fired. And for the third game in a row, I shit you not, the mortar fired, got a misfire, re-rolled it into a misfire. That's 6 bit. This thing has only ever rolled misfires, and then rolled a 1 and blew itself up. I don't want to say mortars are bad. I don't want to say mortars are bad because I don't know if they're good or bad. I took one to see what it was like, and I never got to fire a shot from it. I don't know what the statistical likelihood is. I'm not a boffin, but if anyone out there who's much smarter than I am and good at maths can tell me what the statistical likelihood of rolling 6 misfires in a row with the same unit is, I'd be very, very grateful, because that's got to be some kind of once in a lifetime situation. At least I'm hoping it is, because I don't want to take a mortar again in another list and it continue to do the same thing. Oh. So after turn one, I've badly damaged the Gorgon, and I have badly damaged the chariot, and then it goes over to my opponent's turn. And he ends up just pushing forward with everything, but he's not going to get any turn one charges off. But his Razor Gore starts barreling down the flank, along with his Gorgon and everything coming down the centre. Bestigors coming down the centre. Just a general advance across the line from the Beastmen. But they don't really have any shooting that can do anything. They've only got short bows and whatnot. So they do a big surge, and then that is the end of their turn one. Going over to the Empire turn 2, and we do have a pretty good shooting phase. Firstly, I put the steam cannon into the Gorgon, and it dies. It only had like 1 wound left, so I just bounce the cannon in there. I don't roll a 1 to wound. My opponent doesn't make a 6-up ward save, and it doesn't really matter what I roll. 6-up regen, I should say. It doesn't really matter what I roll on the damage, because it just dies. I then put my next great cannon, the one that was there to help if the steam tank hadn't quite finished off the Gorgon, and I put that into the Razor Gore. I get perfect hit on it, and I do 4 wounds to it, and it dies and falls over. So I've killed 2 things. And then I put the Great Cannon into the Chariot, and that goes down as well. So, oh sorry, I do misspeak. My Great Cannon actually misfired, unfortunately, but just went out of action for a turn or so. And then my Hellblaster Volley Gun went into the Razor or Chariot, and kill that. So I've just picked up these 3 units, no problems whatsoever. And because of the way that he had deployed like his Gorgon and his Ungors and his Chaos Hounds, the cannonballs that have been slamming into the Gorgon have been bouncing through the Hounds and the also in the Ungors, so they've taken some extra casualties as well. So after 2 turns of shooting, I've done some pretty good damage to the Beastmen. As for the Beastmen's turn 2, they continue to advance across the line, but they do bring in their ambushes. Both of their ambushing Gore units come in, and the Minotaurs don't come in, unfortunately, and the ambushing Gores come in, so they're threatening my artillery pieces. They're behind the lines, which is pretty scary. And they do move on, and then they can move, but they don't get a charge. So at least I have a turn to try and deal with them. Everything else just advances forward. The Bestigors, really, they're going to get that turn 3 charge now. There's nothing I can do to stop them. And also his mage with his second of Ungors are just hanging around on the left flank, and his mage is just firing bees at me. I don't know what it's actually called. It's a spell that does like 5d6 attacks, but they're like strength 1. But if they're always going to win on 6s. But if they do wound you, you don't get any armor saves or anything against it. So he starts like unleashing these like tide of bees. The bees! It's like unleashing bees at me, and he like just strips a rank off the back one of my State Tribunes, which was obviously a bit disconcerting. And then he also unleashes a Ruby Ring of Ruin into my cannon, but only manages to take 2 wounds off it. The one that had misfired takes 2 wounds of it. So it's still there. It's just got 1 wound left. Going into turn 3 for the Empire, I was somewhat confident. I've killed a lot of units, but I know that turn 3 is going to be crunch time, and that's going to be difficult for me. So what I do is in the middle, set it up so my Halberdiers will take the charge from the Bestigors, and then hopefully in my turn 4 I'll be able to flank charge him with my Spearmen. And then he does have a Dragono which is coming at me down the right hand flank, but I have a cannon, and I also have a Hellblaster volley gun that can try and deal with that. My Steam Tank goes into his Chaos Hounds. I didn't really want to go into the Chaos Hounds, but there was no other target I could really go for, and my Steam Tank wasn't really in a position where it was going to block up the Bestigors. So I thought, you know what, screw it, I'll get rid of those Chaos Hounds, I'll kill them. No dramas whatsoever. I go in, I smash into them, I crush them, no dramas there. And then the left-hand side, what I do is, obviously his Gores have come in, so I just redress my Halberdier unit so that it's facing them down. And then I use my Mage to wind blast those Gores, and I manage to kill 3 of them. And then on the other side, what I do with my shooting is I unleash the Hellblaster volley gun into the Dragon Ogre, and it gets a perfect volley off. You know, I get a 10 and then like a 4 and a 2, so I get like 16 shots. Dragon Ogre, I'm hitting on 4s because of the Engineer. So like toughness 4 the Dragon Ogre or something. It might be toughness 5, but long story short, I get a good volley, good hits, kind of like in game 1 against the Empire Griffin. And I'm able to just blast that Dragon Ogre off the table, no problems. And then that frees up my cannon to unleash Grape Shot into the Gores, which kills 3 or 4 of them, and forces them to take a panic check. They fail, and essentially that little Gore unit on the right hand side just flees off the board after a couple of turns. The other unit though that lost 3 does not break and actually passes its test, so that's a little bit of a annoying one, the one that got wind blasted, but at least they've been basically contained and basically got rid of. Turn 3 for the Beastman, and he brings his Minotaurs on from ambush on the right hand flank, so he's trying to go after my Steam Tank, because they have got great weapons, so they are pretty good. And then he also charges his Bestigors into my Halberdiers, and then he takes his Gores, the ones that hadn't broken, that had just come in from the left-hand flank, and he tries to charge one of my artillery pieces. I think it's like the Hellblaster, or maybe it was the cannon that was damaged, but doesn't quite make it. He just rolls really badly for his charge. My opponent shooting, he continues to yeet bees into one of my state troop units, and does a bunch of damage, a bunch of casualties to the Spearmen, and then it comes down to combat, and the Bestigors go into my Halberdiers and just butcher them. Really a lot of damage. I do end up falling back in good order. I fall back a reasonable distance, like 3 or 4 inches, and the Bestigors, because they're frenzied because one of the spells he's put on them, have to follow up, which puts them in a perfect position for my flank charge. And I'm thinking, yes, I've held them, I've taken the charge, absorbed it. Now I get the flank charge on him. That's going to be really big. I should be able to win that combat. I might break them. You know, getting charged to flank's never a good thing, right? Well, comes over to the Empire turn, and my steam tank sort of just bimbles around. It hasn't got anywhere really good for it to go. I end up turning it round, thinking that I'll go into the back of the Bestigors, but they end up just getting too far away from it to be able to catch up with them, unfortunately. And then I charge my halberdiers into the Gauls that had failed their charge, that had come in the back left flank, wipe them out, no dramas. I actually ended up pursuing them off the board because I failed the test to restrain. And then it comes over to the big combat. Bestigors versus state troops. I've got the flank charge on. And I kill, like, a few of them. The spearmen go in, but they're spearmen and they haven't got any character support. So it's like 7 attacks. Hitting on 4s, wounding on 5s. -1 to hit because of slug skin. So actually hitting on 5s, wounding on 5s. It's a miracle that I managed to kill 2 of them. And then they've still got frenzy. And they just hack and hack and hack. My halberdiers actually break. They do flee, although they do manage to rally later on. And my spearmen also fall back in good order as well. Now, because the halberdiers had fled first, my opponent couldn't try and chase after them. We may have got this bit wrong, by the way, but this is how we played it. He couldn't chase after them, and then the spearmen ended up breaking next, and so my opponent obviously can't charge after them because they were in his side arc. And so what he ends up doing is he's won the combat, and so he just reforms. Not sure how that works, guys. Let us know down in the comment section, but that's how we played it, and it was round 3 at a fun event, so we weren't too worried about it. Now, in hindsight, what would have been better is if I'd actually broken the spearmen first and then sent those Bestigors down chasing after the broken halberdiers. Sure, there's like a couple of war machines there which are worth some points, but the problem I had is because he was then able to like sort of reform and start going down, working his way down the left hand flank, is there were more war machines down there and also more troops for him to get into. So rather than sending him off on a wild goose chase, he ended up just fighting into the heart of my formation. And to rub salt in the wound, this was a combat that I had initiated in my turn. It's nothing worse than losing a combat that you started. And things go from bad to worse for the Empire, because then we go over to the Beastmen turn, and they charge into the spearmen that had fallen back in good order away from them, and they beat them in combat again. They fall back in good order again, and then the Beastmen overrun into the side of my general's unit. So now he's in combat with 2 state troops, and it's become very obvious that my state troops cannot beat these Bestigors in combat, and I'm struggling to even hold them. The problem I'm having is the -1 to hit on the whole unit is just making so many of my attacks just go wild that I'm struggling to earn a few extra combat res here and there, which would normally mean I'd be giving ground, but I'm essentially just constantly falling back in good order. Now at this point, it is the end of turn 4. I'm about to go into turn 5, and the TO comes over and says, you've only got about 10-15 minutes left and you've got to put your scores in. My opponent says, oh, we should probably just leave it there then. And I say, well, we can do, it's up to you, but I would feel kind of bad about that because you've just started getting into combat. I've had like 3 turns of shooting you, and my army is obviously going to score more points the first 3 rounds. So let's do turn 5, so at least you get an extra round of combat in, and that might give you a chance to get some more points back. My opponent's like, yeah, that's fair enough. Because I'm like, my turn's not going to take very long at all. Most of my army's in combat or is rallying, and so all I do in my turn 5 is basically get into a combat with the Minotaurs with the steam tank. I end up winning that combat. They do break, they do flee, but I don't catch them and then end up rallying. So that's something over there. And then I use some stray artillery fire to break a small unit of Ungors and they flee off the board. But that's basically it. The main thing is going to come down to that combat, which is obviously very, very dicey for me. Now, over the course of 2 rounds of combat, what happens is my opponent issues a challenge and I accept with my unit champion and he kills him. And then the next turn, my opponent issues a challenge again and I have to choose between accepting with my general or my BSB. Now, my BSB is worth a lot of points because obviously it's a battle standard. But my general, and he's only got 2 wounds, so I accept with my with my general, because it's cool. It's the last round. It's the last round. And the funny thing was is that where the characters were lined up, if I didn't accept with my general, my opponent would be able to put his warlord, his general, into my BSB. So he was good, and he would just be able to put all his attacks into there on the front rank, so the characters were right into the front rank, fighting each other. So I think, well, my general's got a good chance of tanking this. He's got 3 wounds, he's got a 4-up save, he's got a 5-up ward. Like, sure, my opponent's got like 5 or 6 attacks with his like frenzy 2-hand weapons, but there's a chance that I survive this. And so in that round 6, that final combat, my opponent gets his hits and he gets 4 wounds on me. And there's no AP on them. He just gets 4 wounds on me. And I fail all of my armor saves and all of my ward saves. Oh no! That's a huge swing. That's like 250 points to my opponent. But things go completely down the toilet in this last Beastman turn because I had been really sloppy with my mage. I should have just marched her back so she was safe. But for some reason, I decided to be aggressive with her. I tried to be like Plague of Rust, like Maswell Initiative onto the Bestigors. And so she ended up being the nearest unit to the enemy spellcaster. And he rolls to do the Ruby Ring, and I dispel that. And then he rolls the bees. And what happens is I miscast on the dispel, do a wound to myself. He gets the spell off and just liquefies her. She just completely gets smashed. And that's another 160 points for my opponent. And so at the end of the battle, because my opponent has got my general for an extra like 100 points, and then killed down who's worth like 200 odd points, and then he's, just all these points just add up at the end, and my opponent ends up winning the game by like 173 victory points. And it all came down to that last turn. But that was why it was so important. And I could sit here and be like, oh, I should have just ended on turn 4 with a TO set, so I should have taken my opponent up on his offer. But no, that would have been wrong, because think about it, my opponent was always going to pull that game back in the final couple of turns. I get to shoot him for 3 turns, he gets to chop my face off for 3 turns. And so I think it was really valuable doing that last turn, because who cares if I win or lose? What matters is like learning from the games. And so I learned that you're going to dominate on Beastmen with shooting for 2 or 3 turns. But when they get there, my God, they will really, really chop you up. So I actually found that a really useful game and a good learning game, because I now have a lot more respect with people. I went after the first 3 turns, I was thinking, these guys are a piece of piss stick down. I don't know what everyone's talking about online. No, respect the Beastmen, man. They're really good. But you want to know the really, really funny thing? Like, the tragic thing. My opponent won by 173 points, right? So even if he had killed that general, and even if he had killed that mage, if my mortar had not exploded turn 1 and given him an extra 95 victory points, then the score, we would have been within 100 points of each other. So it would have been a draw. So actually, it wasn't the Beastman killing my general, and it wasn't the Beastman killing my mage that won in the game. It was my own mortar blowing up turn 1. So I can now confidently say that mortars are so bad that they will lose you a game. Oh no. But with all of that said, we got to the end of game 3 and the end of the tournament, with my Empire infantry and artillery gun line managing to go 1 win, 1 draw, and 1 loss. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of that result. When I told people that I would be taking this kind of army, they did think that I was mad. The general consensus online is that state troops aren't very good and that shooting isn't very good. And I won't completely push back against that, but it's not so terrible that you're going to lose every single game that you play. And interestingly, my bad Empire army beat the supposedly good Empire build. So there's definitely some takeaways there as well. Now, there were a few lessons learned from this tournament. Generally speaking, I want to say that Old World plays really quickly. Apart from that last game when me and my opponent were joking around a lot and chatting and having a few drinks and everything, I got through every single round with time to spare. Lots of time to spare. It's very different playing Old World to 40k. And that might sound obvious, but I'm not talking about the core rules. I'm talking about the time it takes to play a game. 40k, you get 3 hours for a game, and often you still have to talk out like turn 4, turn 5. Old World, you just get through pretty much all the turns. Out of the 6 games I've played competitively of it, there's only one that I have not got to the end of with time to spare now. Another thing about Old World is that at 2,000 points, the game is very different. At 1250, you might come across like one hard thing. At 2,000 points, everyone is bringing all of the wombo combos, and pretty much every army that I faced off against had some kind of quote-unquote Death Star, like the Bestigors with all the characters in them, and the Ironbreakers with all of the characters in them. There's always going to be some mega death unit, and the units themselves are a lot bigger as well. You go from seeing like 10 to 15 like Chaos Marauders up to like big bricks of like 20 or 30 of them. And this kind of feeds into my last point, just generally speaking about Old World, which is at 1250 points, playing on the 60-inch by 44-inch boards is fine. At 2,000 points, it's a little cramped. At no point, even in the mission that was literally called Flank Attack, did I feel like I was at risk of being flanked. Maybe like once or twice, but nothing really. I was able to create a nice long line of infantry and just through sheer mass, just not have flanks. And I felt like at 2,000 points, on those smaller boards, it basically meant people just ended up just crashing into each other. Now that's good because it makes a nice fun, just slugging fest, let's roll dice and kill stuff. But I think there are some armies that do rely upon mobility, and mobility and movement should be a huge part of Old World. So I do think at 2,000 points, it's better played on the 6x4 because it creates more risk, more tension, and more fun. But zooming in a little bit and talking specifically about some lessons learned from these games and about my army and about the armies that I faced, let's look at game number 1. I faced off against a pure Empire Knight army, an army that a lot of people say is the meta way to run them. I think that Knights are really good for the Empire, but at the end of the day, fundamentally, they are 1 wound toughness 3. And so they're not durable enough on their own to survive those grinding combats that a lot of Old World seems to have. And you might just say, oh, that's because of your style of army, Mordian. And it may be. But a lot of Old World relies upon, combat smashing in and then falling back, smashing in, falling. It's not break and cut down. It's grindy. It's ongoing. And it takes quite a lot to really get a unit to the point where it just flees and just goes away, just in a normal combat. Now, of course, there will be units that can do that, but we're talking about Empire Knights here. They're not a unit that's going to do that. So I feel like for Empire, people are saying no infantry whatsoever. I think that's wrong. I don't think you want to go pure infantry or mostly infantry like I did, but I don't think you can go wrong with one big unit of cheap state troops like halberdiers or a unit of great swords. But you want some infantry that can provide you with some mass and which can get into fights with other people's mass, and then your cavalry can go after elite things and they can bully other units as well. In my second game, the main takeaway that I would have is that dwarves are really tough. A lot of people are dunking on dwarves at the moment. They're underestimating them. They're hard as nails. And maybe that's just from an Empire perspective, but they're hard. Those Ironbreakers would not die. Those Hammerers, when I charged them, they didn't die. When they charged me, they didn't die, and I died instead. Dwarves actually are quite a good combat army, and I think that it would be really, really interesting to see a dwarf army similar to what my opponent ran, but maybe just a little bit more long ranged so that it forces people to have to come to you and then make them just break upon your iron, your Gromril line. Yeah, dwarves they look potentially really, really tanky, and I'm a big fan of like tanky stuff. For that third game, I think the main takeaway is twofold. Firstly, even when you have complete shooting domination, the game is still won and lost in combat. And it always comes down to the sharp end. And so if I took that last game and I hadn't had quite as much firepower, but instead I'd had some more heavy hitters and some cavalry and maneuverability of my own, I think that would have been really, really good. That last game, I think, I lost it for a number of reasons. Sloppy play on my side, bit of overconfidence and whatnot, mortar blowing up. But I think that was one of the few games where I thought to myself, I needed a really proper combat unit, like a big unit of knights, a big unit of great swords, something that can actually do damage and not just grind it out. Because the issue of hitting on 5s in combat with state troops was a big big problem against that slug skin. I needed a bit more weapon skill in that last game. But learning from the Beastmen, my god, they are really good. Do not underestimate them. They're fragile. They kind of remind me of like Gene Silicult in 40k, where they're going to pop up all over the place. They are going to chop you to pieces, but they are quite fragile. And you cannot... That was one of the few games where my firepower... It almost got to the point where I thought I could win this on shooting, but... Benefit of hindsight, I realised that that's just always how games against Beastmen are going to go. They're going to run at you, they're going to take a lot of casualties, but when they get to you, they're going to hurt you. Final, last thought, I want to pick out my favourite unit from the tournament, and that was the Hellblaster Volley Gun. My god, this thing was a death machine. It was one of the few units in my army where every single turn it did something. It wasn't like my cannons, which often did something, but occasionally didn't do very much at all or just missed. It wasn't like my state troops, who sometimes could win combat, sometimes couldn't. It just always did damage. First game, it saved my ass just folding up that Griffin and just blowing it apart to tiny little pieces. And then in the second game, it was the one thing that had the volume and to be able to just pick that gyrocopter out of the sky, and it saved me from those Rangers just running around starting to get into more artillery and stuff. And in the third game, it was just blasting that right flank, constantly supporting fire into it, and just picking up all sorts of things. It picked up the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth, it picked up the Chariot. It was constantly doing good damage. In that last game, I think if I'd had my Hellblaster going to those best scores from the beginning, it might have changed things a little bit, but maybe not, because it still came down to close combat. But yeah, the Hellblaster Volley Gun, S tier unit, and frankly, in most competitive lists, I'm thinking the first two things you want to put in there is a steam tank and a Hellblaster Volley Gun with an engineer. But of course, all of that is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I hope you guys have been enjoying these after action reports. I've certainly enjoyed making them, and I made them for 40k, but I've really enjoyed making them for Old World as well. If you've got any ideas for other armies, other types of Empire army or other factions that you would like to see me take to the competitive scene, let me know down below, and I'll do my best to try and muster those forces and try them out at a tournament. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button, and if you want to see more content like this, subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing, truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members, so thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Mad Larkin, Marcus Roberts, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Wolf, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.